Paul Dumars, Finance Committee.
Barbara McQuinn, School Board Member.
Ed Tierney, Chief of Staff.
Ron Haran, Treasury.
Brenda Giampetti, Treasury.
Laura Howe, PFM.
Jason Heumann, PFM.
Leanne Evans, Treasurer.
Rick Miller, Finance Committee. Our guest, Holly. Welcome all. First item, approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is approved. The minutes of March 1, 2019. Do I hear a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Any questions?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comments? Well, this is our investment banking public. We do have some matters we might be interested in. Okay. Quarterly investment report. Leon?
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to turn this over and let Jason Heumann from PFM give us a market update and a quick overview on all the work they've been doing for us so far this year. Jason, you got it. I'm not sure if that lets you move or not. If it doesn't, I'll keep up with you here. There you go.
Looks like it's working. Great.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Please excuse my slightly deeper voice than normal, but I will try to get through this and get you guys an update on the market and the portfolio. So if you remember when we were here last quarter, equity markets were down, S&P down almost 15%. Treasury yields were climbing. Fixed income portfolios with treasuries only were outperforming the diversified portfolio that you all had. In the first quarter, the equity markets have normalized, fixed income markets have normalized. Your portfolio returns have come back in line with what we would expect them to be. GDP numbers, the Q4 number came in at 2.2% that you can see, it's on the right-hand side here. Slightly lower than Q2 and Q3, but those numbers were quite impressive. Largest back-to-back numbers since 2014. So 2.2%, still strong growth. Rolling four-quarter average about 3%. You can see going forward the Bloomberg survey of economists expect GDP numbers to continue about where we were in the Q4 number through the rest of the year. You know, last year we had the tax cuts funneling growth. Those have expired. We're starting to see household spending slow down just a little bit. So, you know, still strong growth numbers, but not the 3.5%, 4.5% that we saw last year would we expect to see in 2019. Job numbers still very good. Sorry, Leanna. Pushed a little too hard there.
That's okay.
In March, we had 196,000 jobs offered or added. If you remember, back in February, there was a kind of a blip in the market. There was only 28,000 jobs, revised up to 33,000 jobs. You see that very small number there where Leanne has the mouse, but that was a one-off type event, so jobless growth is still strong. Unemployment rate still at historical lows, 3.8%. You can see that number has trended down since March of 2014 continuously. So going in the right direction. We're seeing wages tick up. Wages had been flat, excuse me, most of last year, while the jobless claim unemployment rate had continued to decrease. So we're glad that we're finally seeing wages increase along with that decreasing unemployment rate. Inflation. Okay, thank you. Perfect. So the Fed prefers to look at the core PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, looking for their target around 2%. You can see most of last year, number hovering right at or over 2%. A slight dip at the end of the year and into the first quarter here. The Fed's indicated that they're going to be patient with rates this year, so don't expect any drastic actions if inflation were to go slightly over 2% or hang around under 2% this year. Expectations for inflation over the next 5 years here, you can see at the end of the first quarter, we're expecting kind of modest inflation, upper ones, 1.5 to 2% in inflation over the next 5 years. This chart's just a little continuation from what we talked about last quarter. Over the last 5 months, you can see how far the yields have fallen on both the 2-year and the 10-year Treasury. These peaked out 2008, 2011 here on the 2-year and the 10-year, and have since fallen coming through the first quarter. This one's very interesting. So we're finally seeing a yield curve inversion on the front end. We've been keeping an eye on it for quite some time. This chart shows where rates were last year at the end of March in this yellow bar, end of December in the green dotted bar, and then finally the end of the first quarter in blue. And you can see that the 3 and 6 month are out yielding all the way down to the 10-year at the end of the first quarter. The 6-month 10-year was only inverted for a short amount of time. That's back correct, upward sloping, but we do have some inversion still under 5 years in the curve. With the flat curve, we've brought duration back, higher, closer to in line with the benchmark, as in we're not looking to make big interest rate bets. We're looking to pick up yield for you all in our sector allocation and our name selection within the corporate space. So the yield curve is currently flat. Next slide, I think we're going to talk about how the Fed doesn't expect to increase interest rates this year. We feel the same way. So we're just continuing to clip that coupon, pick up yield with the names in your portfolio, and not make any interest rate bets. This one here, just showing credit spreads are starting to widen back out again. If you remember in the fourth quarter, credit spreads were very high. Your corporate sector names really suffered during the fourth quarter. We used that as an opportunity to make some purchases in the portfolio, and we were able to realize some nice gains in the first quarter when those spreads came back in line. But they are starting to creep up a little bit, nothing like that we saw at the end of last year. Here's the dot plot I mentioned a few minutes ago. Recall, we talk about this pretty much every quarter, but each one of these blue dots is a voting member of the Federal Open Market Committee, where they expect interest rates to be at the given time periods along the bottom here. You can see at the end of 2019, the median has the Fed not raising rates in 2019, according to the voting members. We've also plotted the Fed funds futures market here in the green. So this is what the market actually thinks that the rates will do in these given time periods. So the market's actually projecting a cut sometime 2019, 2020. We can actually see one this year. I'll show you on the next slide that there's about a 25-30% chance of a cut maybe in 2019 of interest rates. But I think the most interesting one to me on this chart is kind of the longer term area, where the Fed voting members expect the Fed funds rate to be long-term, still under 3%. Prior to the financial crisis, we were at 5.25%. So is 3% the new normal for Fed funds rate? We'll have to see. This chart shows where the market or the Fed funds rate futures expected the Fed funds rate to be at the end of 2019 at these given points in time. So if we look back last year in March, the market would have expected rates to rise 1 or 2 times at the end of this December. That theme stayed steady most of the year until we got to that fourth quarter. And then expectations kind of fell way off to flat. And you can see now at the end of March, the expectations are 1, maybe 2 cuts for rates this year.
And why is that?
Well, the GDP slowing down a little bit, right? The Fed has 2 mandates: keep inflation in check, keep full employment, right? If you remember back, there's a slide back here where inflation had fallen just a little bit here. This number keeps going this way, keeps going where it's heading, and the Fed will want to make money a little bit easier to get, right? So they may cut rates there. If it goes the other way, it goes too quickly, the Fed has indicated they're going to be patient this year. They're not going to jump and raise rates at the first touch of inflation over 2%. So that's why it leads the probabilities to a cut this year, because there's not many people you could find that would think we'd have a hike this year. More and more folks are saying if we start to see things slowing down, if we start to see the 10-year bull market start to slow down, the Fed's going to have to do something to get out in front of this so we don't go into a recession. I'll tell you our personal PFM internal view is we think 2019 is going to be just fine. We're looking out into 2020, specifically the second half, to when we might start to see some sort of a little bit of slowdown.
Would a Fed reduction also help eliminate with some of the yield curve inversion?
It would.
Reduce that front end of the yield curve?
Absolutely, because the front end of the yield curve is tied very, very close to the Fed, and of course, the longer end of the yield curve is market expectations. So
Yeah, that's
right now,
right here.
part of the reason we have the inverted yield curve is the market does not think the longer-term economy is going to be
Right.
strong, and the Fed's been pushing up rates since December of 2015. Any other market questions I can help with? Okay. All right, let me move into the details of the two portfolios. Go rather quickly here because I've been speaking a little long here, so I want to make sure we stay on time. But here's the longer-term portfolio. I'm going to zoom in here. I know there's a lot on this page. We'll work from left to right here. End of March 31st, total market value in the longer-term portfolio, $44.5 million. The cash in the portfolio, $8,000. I know Leanne's really good about keeping all the cash low and invested properly, so I'd like to point that out. Yield at market, which is the yield, excuse me, if you were to go out and purchase these securities in the market at the end of March 31st, 2.42%. Obviously, we purchased securities over time in your portfolio, so the yield at cost, 2.15%. Very short portfolio duration at 1.5 years, average maturity 1.6 years, high credit quality, average of AA. You can see on this chart everything inside 3 years on the portfolio, 38% inside a year, the rest inside 3 years. We break out the credit quality ratings here for the pie chart. Again, a very high credit quality portfolio, nothing changed there. Same with the sector allocation, pretty much the same as it has been. Treasuries 45.5%, corporates 25%, and then agencies about 30%. Here's the important one, total return for the quarter. If you remember last quarter, it was a struggle for us, but with the market correction and the name selection we did, we were able to have a positive outperformance in your portfolio during the quarter. You zoom in here so you can see 1.15% for the portfolio versus 0.98% for the benchmark. And one we haven't seen in a while here is this 1 year number. So 1 year total return over 3%. It's been a while since we've seen that in any of our portfolios. So it's a great sign, outperforming the benchmark by 32 basis points. And then going out the right side all the way back to inception, you'll see continuous annualized outperformance against the benchmark. Next couple of pages are just breaking out performance in different ways. We always provide the previous 4 quarters to you, as well as the net of fees returns here as well. So I'll show you the sector allocation here. You'll notice kind of the real change here in the increase in Treasury position versus agencies. Those spreads are getting really tight, Treasury versus agency. We're not seeing as much value in the agency for the incremental risk, so we've been rotating kind of out of agencies back into Treasuries in that space, and then we've picked up a 3 percentage point increase in the corporate names as well. Maturity and duration charts, these are just some expanded versions of the earlier charts, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. I want to make sure I show you some of the trades we did during the quarter. Still seeing corporate names yielding well over 3%. For example, Wells Fargo, 3.25% here, Oracle over 3%, Toyota Motor over 3%. So even the treasuries are in the high 2s, corporates low 3s. So we're still seeing a good yield pickup when we go out and make purchases in your portfolio. Bunch of interest payments on the next few pages here. Then transactions just sort of by date range. We do discuss this with staff on a regular basis, so they can always reach out to questions on these minute details, but want to make sure we get everything covered today. We also have the short-term portfolio for you. I know Leanne's going to present more in depth on that one, but I did want to give you some highlights from the short-term portfolio. $675 million at the end of the quarter. Yield at cost, actually higher than yield at market, so I do want to make sure I point that out. Investing at the right time that we did last year. It takes a lot of teamwork, and Leanne has a lot of spreadsheets that we all go through and make sure we get these investments done. But because we locked everything up last year, we're able to out-yield the current market rates by timing things out over your cash flow. So excellent job by Leanne and her staff to get all of that lined up correctly. Short-term portfolio made up of treasuries, agencies, and CP. Obviously very short, everything inside a year. Make sure, cover one more thing here. I want to make sure I point out the asset allocation chart. Some may call this the compliance check chart. What we've done here is we've hard-coded your investment policy into this model. Your policy limits being the yellow bars, the current utilized portions of the policy represented in blue. So you can see all of your sectors that we're allowed to invest in, have room for us to make strategic allocations in and out of sectors. You have room to move things in and out of sectors on the short end as well. So everything is in compliance with the investment policy on a sector basis. At the end of the quarter, we break this down into a little more detail on an individual issuer basis, because not only do you have sector maximums, you also have individual issuer maximums. We list those here as well, and then list out each position showing that you are in compliance on a name basis as well for the quarter. Any questions I can assist with?
Now, I have another investment report. It's the district one that we present every quarter. And we've made some slight changes to this with this, and I want to make sure we point these out. A lot of the information is exactly what Jason went through. This is just looking at it as a district-wide summary. So we're again comparing benchmarks. I keep coming up with tasks and ways we can improve this report. One of the things we're working on right now is coming up with an overall interest rate for the short-term pool. We haven't been able to figure out how to do that yet. The system that we use looks at daily rates where we're loading in bank balances as of the end of the month. So it skews the data a little bit. So we're still showing you the individual return rates for all the short-term portfolio. I'm hoping to get to where we can give you an overall return for that whole entire short-term portfolio. Did want to point out tax collections are about 92%. It's just about the same as it was last year. We've got pretty good history and expectations on when those tax revenues will come in, so it tends to be pretty stable. And then this is the portfolio distribution, very similar to what Jason just showed you. But the next chart I changed this a little bit. I changed the chart a little. I think it still gives you the same information, just showing again how everything is split up, the asset allocation. I've added a new chart, which is similar to what you've seen before, except last time I think it looked like rainbows up on the screen, and I finally figured out how to fix that. So this is showing how the short-term cash is being allocated, and it's giving you the projections. So one of the things that our goal for this year is to try to reduce the amount of cash in banks, because we can invest it at a higher rate, taking it outside. So you'll see this green number, and it's really, this is getting where I want it to be. We're keeping track of the fact that we do have maturities coming up in May, so that's why this number starts to go up, and the orange, which is the investments we have with PFM, are going down. We're planning to do some reinvestment. We're watching, we have a very large payroll. Our unions, a lot of them negotiated and settled, and there's a large retroactive payment for them that's going to happen at the beginning of May. So once we know what that number is, we have a lot of maturities come in, and we're going to be investing the excess. So I'm hoping to see that cash stays in this range. We'll see how well we do it. We haven't tried to manage cash like this in 10 years probably. So it's a lot of training on the staff, part of staff in my office and other departments, getting used to the fact that we're not going to have a lot of cash in the bank. That still is somewhere about, we're trying to shoot for about $150 million, which is about a month. Payroll is $60 million every 2 weeks. So just keeping a month's worth of payroll is a lot of money. So we're trying to continually work that down, but this is the working tool that I'm looking at on a regular basis, and this is updated every day based on cash in and cash out. So remember when we talk about, I'm worried about the percentage in local government investment pools, the projection we have for that is to keep it constant, the amount of money there, but that same amount of money becomes a much bigger percentage as cash overall shrinks. So we're using this year to experiment with that to make sure that is okay. And if we run into any problems, we'll come back to you in December with a proposed change in the investment policy, but I'm hoping we can make it work within the guidelines that we have right now. I mean, obviously, we will make it work, but we may ask for changes. We'll see how that goes. Then we go through and show the investments, which we've really seen that already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the individual investments. This is the same information PFM has in their report, but a little bit further down is the update on the sales tax, and I always bring that update to this committee. The revenues continue ahead of projections at 114%. Of course, that could change, but that's where they are right now, and our total expenditures to date are at 102 million. So when we talk a little bit later on about the sales tax financing, it looks like we don't need to do it. We've got $286 million have received, and we've spent $100 million. So there's about $179 million cash right now. So you would think we would not be coming to you to borrow. We're going to show you why. It's really a budgetary issue. It's not a cash issue. But we'll bring that to you just a little bit later in the meeting. And then we do have interest earnings to date of $3.9 million. That's going to continue to grow with all the money that's being invested. And then behind this report got a lot bigger this month. We've added in all the information on the local government investment pools. So you have pages on the Florida Education Investment Trust Fund. That's the one that we work to help create, and I'm on the advisory committee, and Mr. Shaw is the chair of their advisory board. And then a little bit further on, and it shows all the investments. It's something we're paying attention to. We have money in these pools. We need to make sure we're watching those holdings as well as our own. And then it moves on, and we have the information from Florida Prime, which is the pool that's managed by the state. And we have about 50, 60 million there. So lots of information. If you're ever curious about what's going on in those pools, we've attached that information as well. So are there any questions on investments before we move on to the capital plan?
Just a question. How close do you look, how close does the Florida Investment Trust Fund, your school fund, look to this state fund? How?
Their gross return is generally a little higher than Florida Prime. The net is a little less because the state there's lower fees, and we've talked about that before. Part of it, there is an implicit subsidy from the state. They've got people there that are managing this pool and also managing the pension fund. So their fees are less, partially because they're much bigger. That's a $13 billion pool as compared to Florida Investment Trust, which is about $3 billion.
Almost $3 billion,
Yeah.
right? And the features are slightly different as well. We have a term product where we're able to ladder out the maturities and lock in rates for a set amount of dates. So that's where we really see the value for the school district in that area.
Yeah, that term product, that I believe is in yellow. So what we did with that product, we locked in January the money that we'll need to make the June debt service payments. So I was able to lock in a higher rate. It's not, those dollars are not locked, bundled in with the others at the overnight pool. So they actually purchased a set number of securities to lock in a rate for us.
And so that's a substantial benefit, and it costs a little more, presumably, to do that.
No, it's all of the FEIT products are on a net of fees basis.
Yeah.
So there's two components of the FEITF fund, the daily overnight rate and the term product. No additional fees for using the term product.
Yeah, when we do these investments, I actually have a little chart, and when Jason mentioned spreadsheets, I send them a tremendous amount of data. I come up with how the cash flows need to be. I let them review it and I want them to ask questions and look at it. Then we work together to come up with how we're investing. But I'm looking at cash, looking at the bank interest rate net of FDIC fees, and then I'm looking at the investments with PFM net of their fees. And then FEITF, either one is already net of fees. So we're comparing all those rates to try to come up with an apples-to-apples comparison. We're also looking at the Treasury's agency's corporate notes to come up with a structure of how we're investing it. We're doing this much more actively, if that's the right term, than we've done in the past few years. We have a much larger pool of investments. And there was a lot of dialogue going back on what should be in investments versus what's in term, versus what's in the liquid pool, versus Florida Prime, versus cash. So we're spending a lot of time on that, and I told them when we did them in December that I expected we'd be reinvesting in May. So we're already looking at what those projected interest rates are to determine how far out we want to do these investments. But since we're keeping less than cash, that short-term pool, I think, in the past, it's rolled off and there's been nothing by June or July. I think we're just going to have a constant pool of securities there going forward. Okay, if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to go into next the capital plan. And usually I bring that to you in July or August just before the board approves it. I'm happy to say we have that done earlier than ever before. So this will be going to, we took it to a budget advisory committee last week. It'll go to the construction oversight committee next week and goes to the board on May 8th. And as I'll talk through this, we still have some things we're working on. The legislative session isn't quite done yet. We don't have the final numbers from the tax collector's office or property appraiser's office. There's still a number of things in play. So we're going to start this off with a legislative update, and depending on the audience, we adjust the number of bills and things we're looking at, and this is changing daily. So I'm going to try to go through it, and I fully expect that Mr. Burke's going to chime in with updates on these. But one of them that impacts this committee, really looking at House Bill 7123, it is requiring that school districts will share the funds for the operation levy that was just approved by voters in November. So even though our ballot language said the funds were for district-operated schools, the state is requiring that we share that with charter schools on a pro rata basis, and I understand the House approved that yesterday.
Last night. Yep.
So that's something that we're going to be monitoring, obviously.
Just our school board actually about a week ago approved a call to action to try to raise awareness around this issue and try to respect the will of the voters in Palm Beach County. And we felt it was really, the fact that this would be retroactive was kind of highly unusual. And so those were kind of the two main points of contention. And unfortunately, the House has carried through, and yeah, the vote was, I know Mr. Tierney was following, I think it was close to 11 o'clock last night. So now our attention turns to the Senate. The Senate tax bill currently does not have any type of provision like this within it, and we hope it stays that way because the Senate's our best chance to try to knock this down. But it could put the board in a tough spot because now they're changing the law after we've already approved a referendum that was in keeping with the law at the time, last November, and we have voters, 72.37% of them supported the referendum, knowing that it was explicit in the ballot language that it was only for non-charter district schools. And now we have potentially a law that would say, no, you must share it with charter schools.
Blair, do you have an opinion on that? Do you have an opinion on the?
Yeah, it's a mess.
Well, it seems like it's illegal when you have a voter-approved referendum with certain language in it. And then the legislature tries to reverse the vote.
We've retained counsel, and we'll explore all options if it ultimately passes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway.
That's one of the big bills we're watching. There's also a bill that would require that going forward, all local referendums, sales tax and everything else, would have to have an approval by 2/3 of the voters instead of 50%.
Oh my God.
So that would impact every type of referendum, whether it's city, county, school districts. It goes after all of them. It requires 2/3 approval of the voters. So our referendum for the operating millage passed by 72%. The sales tax passed by 54%. So if we were doing the sales tax today, it wouldn't have been approved under this law if it's approved. There's also, and this is something that you'll be dealing with directly, local government fiscal transparency, and it looks like this is going to go through. It requires advanced public notice. So when we do a debt issue, if it's long-term debt like a COPS issue or a lease, we would have to do an advertisement in 2 public hearings, which we've never done before. It also requires a debt affordability analysis, and we're still trying to understand exactly what that's going to look like.
It's for all governments, not just
Yes. Yes. So that's something before we are looking to do a COPS issue, and we hope to do that in October. If this is approved, we'll be one of the first people to try to come up with this debt affordability analysis. So PFM is working to try to figure out what that will be. Until it's approved, it's not really, it's something we're just keeping a close eye on. But right now, this one I think has been, last time I looked, it had been approved by the House and the Senate. I could be wrong, but I think that one is moving forward. So it's the extra cost and time of doing the public hearings and certainly doing that extra analysis. I think most of the analysis required, we're already doing in our annual debt report. It may not be in the same format the state requests. So I don't think it's a big deal for us. It's just another hoop to jump through. And certainly the public hearings, that's new and different for us. We do that for the budget every year, but not for debt issues. It would not be required for the TAN for short-term operating borrowing, but it is for long-term debt.
So we get lots of accountability measures and transparency. We just don't get a lot more money out of the legislature. But I guess the hope is that if we can see the money, that'll uncover so much waste that we can get by on the existing revenue. But that's kind of the mindset. There's, this is the financial list. There's a lot of other things going on. We got the parent empowerment scholarships. That was our vouchers. That would be, something that was they attempted to do about 14 years ago. It was struck down by the Florida Supreme Court, and now it's kind of come back. And it would direct what we call our FEFP dollars that are to operate our schools. It would direct them into those vouchers. And the pool of people eligible for the vouchers has grown, where it used to be strictly kind of people for a lower income. That income bracket has grown up into like the middle income area. And we've got potentially the Guardian program could expand to include classroom teachers, so teachers would be able to carry guns. Our school board has taken a position against that, but that's an option for other schools across the state. So.
And there is a lot going on in Tallahassee. I tried to limit them just to the ones that I knew that would touch this committee, but if you're interested, there is a lot more that we're all monitoring. Okay, so into the capital plan. It's been updated from last year to include everything that we're aware of. There are still things that are outstanding. Some of the significant enhancements, we've increased funding for air conditioning replacements. We're proposing to do 2 more equipment leases for those. So, the payments are spread over a 5-year window. We've increased the funding for computers, and right now, the budget includes borrowing for those with a 3-year borrowing. And I'm hoping, and I think we're going to have enough flexibility with the last few things coming in the budget that I won't need to borrow for that. I would really prefer not to borrow for computers. I mean, they have technically state law requires they have to have a 5-year useful life, but computers, they change so often that having them for 5 years doesn't really make sense. I'd prefer not to borrow for these. So any flexibility we get with revenues is going to be to eliminate that borrowing. We still need to buy the computers. We have a bump for 2 years, buying a lot of them because of the Windows 7 operating system is end of life, no longer supported, so we need to replace all those units. And so it's about $14 million each for the 2 years of computers that we'll be buying. We've added in some remodeling for this building to expand the space for school police and their emergency operations center. By the way, I mean, you've seen in the news, we're hiring a lot more police officers. There's a swearing-in ceremony today at 10 in this room. I was asked to invite you all in case you're interested in staying. So we're adding some space, some money in the budget for that. There's going to be there's a modular addition, which is really moving portables around to build them a campus out of the concrete modulars for South Intensive. We're also looking at doing something similar for Sunset Palms. That would be for grades 6 through 8, which would be, we need to get board approval for that, but we've got that locked in the capital plan as an option. So that's one of the things that the board will be looking at. We're looking at adding Wi-Fi on the school buses for 2 reasons. One is for the students, so they have something to do on long bus rides. They can work on homework. It would be the same Wi-Fi access they have in school. So there's a lot of firewalls. They can't get to anything in the world, but they can get to things they need to get to. We're also looking at updating all the cameras on the buses so they're running on Wi-Fi, so the police department would be able to access those real time. So the Wi-Fi is going to do 2 things at once on those buses. And we've also increased the funding for musical instruments. I think that's long overdue, and we built that into the budget.
Wow. This question's probably for Mike. I mean, is the bus fleet, you're pretty happy with it right now after the last capital?
It's much improved. I mean, we've been We had gone through the recession in a period of time where we were not able to replace buses. We're kind of back on a annual replacement cycle. We have about 800 buses in our fleet, and we're buying about 10% or 80 buses a year, so we get like on a 10-year replacement cycle. Leanne's helped jumpstart that a little bit. So we have bought probably, 300 or so buses in the last couple of years, but,
Right.
If you talk to transportation, they'd still like to buy more. So I think we're doing much better, and the breakdowns and, that now reports up to Ms. Wanda Paul, but just from being in the conversation, I know they're in much better shape than they were years ago when we had kind of that meltdown in 2015.
Yeah, if you remember, we did some borrowing for buses. Our first bus leases were for buses. And now we have a dedicated stream coming from the sales tax. And there's about $8 million a year being funneled in to buy buses out of the sales tax. So I think that really has helped even out that stream to where we're regularly replacing buses.
Because you guys come to us and said there was a problem. So-
Yeah, there was.
So it's been fixed, at least
That
to
part
your
has.
liking. It's not ever fixed.
Yes,
The
we've
buses.
taken, we've also gotten a lot of old buses and we've surplus them and auctioned them off. We had, so the fleet has definitely been upgraded.
If you see them driving around, the first digit on the bus is telling you the fiscal year it was purchased. So you'll see a lot of them that are much newer, and you see the bright, shiny yellow buses these days. You don't see the old ones that often anymore. So I'm not going to go through every one of these, but this is the construction projects. It's $710 million. This number is probably a little bigger than it's about the same as last year, but some projects that we planned to fund last year with a COPS issue, we delayed, and they're included here again because we haven't done the borrowing yet. If you recall, we did a reimbursement agreement that came through the Finance Committee to get permission to spend, and we expect to spend about $1.5 million on those projects this year, and we'll reimburse ourselves with the COPS issue next year. The ones in bold are the ones that are new projects. So the remodeling and the Emergency Operations Center for School Police is here, South Intensive and Sunset Palm Modular Additions that I mentioned earlier. Transportation West Central, this really isn't new. It shows up new on the capital plan, but in the past, the Transportation West Central was a $15 million project. Now we're leaving this at $2.5 million and bumping $12.5 million to this site. We did that intentionally. That West Central Transportation and the sales tax, and those are sales tax funded, was larger because we didn't know if we'd get permission to use this Skis Road site for a new bus compound. So we were either going to do a major expansion to the existing West Central or do what we're planning to do now, just a small upgrade to the West Central and build a new bus compound. So we're splitting those two out. So it seems new, but it was always planned. We just didn't know if we'd get county approval. And then this is the debt service slide, and you all have seen this many times before. So it's something we're monitoring. It does have the long-term debt, the COPS issues are included, and then the short-term leases are not in this chart, but they're in the budget. So we've got $1.39 billion for previously issued COPS issues, $283 million over the 10-year window for the new COPS that we plan to issue, and then $62 million for the equipment leases. And I'm hoping to drop that down almost in half if we don't borrow for the computers. So I'll come back to you at our next meeting. We'll have that finalized. I actually hope to know that within the next couple of weeks once the legislative session's done, and we'll get our numbers for property values on June 1st. So we'll know that pretty quickly. I think that will drop down significantly. The point here is we're skirting right along the edge of half of that 1.5 mils. And I just won't give up on that green line, which is 50% of the 2 mills that we used to have. And if the state had not reduced our taxing authority, our borrowing capacity would be significantly higher because we'd have a larger revenue stream to work with. Facility projects are all the other facility things. So regular maintenance, facility renewals is all the deferred maintenance that's being funded with the sales tax. So we still have a sizable amount of that rolling over into the next year. We'll talk about that a little bit more with the sales tax, just the nature of those projects. Security and technology, we have expedited all the security projects. There is one last amount that was to be funded in 21, and we're moving that to 20. There's a lot of projects our school police department is working on. Our facilities department is taking care of all the single point of entry, all the facility enhancements. But there's also some money for school police, and they're looking at some technology advances and some things centrally that will help them better manage all the school sites to ensure the safety of the students. So that's all been moved up. And then they do have an ongoing stream for maintenance. And I want to remind everybody, these numbers are for 10 years. So they look really, really large, but this is a 10-year capital plan. Technology, there's obviously a lot of money. This education technology projects, that's coming from the sales tax referendum. But then the other technology and infrastructure, we spend a lot of money on the infrastructure for this district, making sure that we have all the appropriate measures to keep all the data safe and keep everything working. This has become a big issue even for security because so many things are working off Wi-Fi. So adding additional Wi-Fi access points throughout the schools, having access to that outside on football fields. So expanding that technology footprint beyond just the classrooms to where it covers the entire campus is a big project we're working on. Transportation, this goes right into the school buses. So there's $217 million allocated over the 10-year window for buses and other vehicles. And then equipment, this includes furniture and equipment replacement, the musical instrument increase I mentioned earlier, and just ongoing maintenance. The other capital items includes property and flood insurance. This is something we're keeping an eye on. That number may need to increase. Cost of property insurance keeps rising. So if I look at next year's capital plan, I'm already assuming this number is going to go up because it just continues to grow. Reserves, and I remind, don't focus too much on reserves. When you look at the actual 5-year plan, all this increase is in the last 5 years. It's actually in the last 3 years. So what will happen, there is a COPS issue that was planned in year 7, and I thought it was going to be in year 8. Some of the projects shifted around. So now we need to borrow in year 7 for the projects, but there's extra money in year 8, 9, and 10. So I expect this number, I'm hoping by the time we're done with this budget for adoption, it drops more into the $200 million range, and I can eliminate a COPS issue in the out years. There's a couple things in play there regarding impact fees, and I'll bring that up in just a minute. Charter schools, right now we have budgeted somewhere between $10 and $11 million a year for dollars that we may have to share with charter schools. And this is in addition to the referendum we talked about earlier. We're on the hook to share capital outlay dollars with charter schools unless the state funds it. The last time I looked, the House was funding it. The Senate was not, but the Senate was also saying, we're just not going to fund charter schools at all. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. Right now, I'm assuming we have to share it with charters. Depending on what happens to the legislative session, that's $10 million that could be freed up to purchase those computers and eliminate that computer lease. So I really do hope that that's going to happen. But it's something over the 10-year window, it's $106 million. It's actually $116 million, adding those two together, that we've earmarked for charters. So the variables, we're final tax roll dollars, we don't know what those are. We're working off state projections right now. We've talked with the property appraiser's office. They think they're reasonable. So it still could be up or down slightly, but we think we have decent numbers there. We just have to wait to see what actually comes up. The state funding for charter schools we talked about. There is an allocation that we were required to put in the capital plan last year for PICO construction funds. We've not received these in over 10 years. I fully expect that that is not going to come to fruition. And it's about $1.7 million a year over 10 years that will come out, and I'll have to fund things another way. Impact fees, last week, the county approved an increase in school impact fees. So single-family home is going from $1,800 to about $6,900. It's the first increase in impact fees we've had since 2004 or 5, before the last sales tax. This puts us right in the middle of the pack with all the other school districts in the state. We were the lowest in the state. So we're very pleased. I'm waiting for the county to provide some updated projections for us, and that would have extra revenue in the capital plan as well. That's not there right now, but the county approved it. We're thrilled with the support from the county. Legislative issues, we've talked about a lot of those. Those could certainly impact us. There are some additional needs for maintenance coming up. It's something we're watching very closely. There's a lot of vacancies. They're trying to find and hire staff, and they're having difficulty doing that. We may have to outsource some maintenance, which would increase the cost. So that's another item. Working with IT to try to update the funding for computers so that we can reach the 1-to-1 ratio students for computers. Right now, we're a little less than that. They've advised me they need about $4 million a year starting in 2021. So that would not impact us for the first year of the plan, but it would impact going forward. So I'm hoping to be able to put that in the budget, in the capital plan this year. If not, keep that on the list of things to fund next year. We are dealing with rising construction costs that will certainly impact projects as we move forward. And I always remind everybody, a lot of the revenue is sales tax, and it's all earmarked for specific projects. So while balancing it was a little easier this year, that sales tax money is all earmarked for very specific projects, and we're not planning to touch that in any way. Those dollars will stay with those projects. So that is the update on the capital plan. And I have the actual capital plan attached if you're interested. I tried to do a good summary of it, so we don't need to open that up, but I'm happy to do that if you'd like to look at the details.
What's the implication if you have to share with the charter schools part of the sales tax?
There's nothing in legislation to share the sales tax with charters. That has not come up yet, knock on wood. They have not gone there. And that's something we would certainly be arguing and fighting over, because the sales tax was for a specific project list. So again, that would be, and you have to have a project list by law. So I think the state would have a harder time going retroactive after sales tax, but that's my personal opinion.
So just give us an order of magnitude, what kind of dollars are you talking about? If that, the first bill that you showed us would be a pass.
Mike can probably
I can
answer
take that. So the voters approved a 1 mil property tax levy for 4 years. That's going to generate about $200 million a year, starting with the upcoming school year. The law would require that we share with the charter schools based on enrollment, like their prorated share. And right now, they're about 11% of our enrollment, so about $22 million a year, about $88 million over the duration, which is significant because we've already, we were pretty clear with the voters exactly how we plan to spend the money. A little more than half of it's going to improve teacher pay for our district teachers, and we've negotiated exactly how we would pay out what we call retention supplements, where a teacher that has at least 10 years of experience gets a $10,000 salary increase. 5 years or more gets $5,000, and then between 1 to 5 years they get $1,000 more. So we've, as Ms. Evans said, we're ramping up our police force. We're going well above and beyond what the state has provided. We added 75 officers this year. We'd add close to another 80 officers next year, plus the command staff and more canine units and the equipment and all of that. So, and mental health was the other big component of the referendum. And we've advertised 170 mental health professional positions to work in all of our schools. So we're forging ahead with the plan we presented to the voters. And, it'd be hard.
$22 million a year.
Yes, so that would be the challenge, I guess, is to try to cut $22 million out of it, and we'd have to make some tough choices. But we got to cross that bridge when we get to it and consult with our Office of General Counsel over there.
I mean, Mike, before November when we sat in the meeting and you talked about, because obviously it was controversial within the school board before they finally determined the final referendum, particularly on those last items you talked about in terms of mental health and security. I mean, has there been discussions between the charter schools and the district about that specific issue as opposed to capital projects, but in terms of security at the charters?
No, I don't think there's any significant conversations. The charter schools now, we pass along, there are two state categorical funding sources for safe schools and mental health, and the charter schools receive their full share of those dollars. And then, it's kind of up to them to make provisions for their kids. We've got 2 conversion charter schools within the county, which are a little unique, in which we do contract with them and we provide police coverage, but they pay for that service. But those conversion charters are housed in district facilities. They used to be district schools.
Right. But you do have some situations where you guys are
just really those 2 conversions. The legislation is there's a lot of, they'll probably address some of these issues next year about to really delineate the responsibilities hopefully more clearly, because it was a little ambiguous the last go around. But like, for example, the Guardian program, that was something we didn't embrace as a school district for our schools. That's where you can have someone goes through about 140 hours of training and can carry a gun, and that training is provided by the sheriff. Last year, both the sheriff and the school board said we were not interested in the Guardian program. The legislation that's moving through now would shift that decision solely to the school board to make the call. And so potentially you could have, the school board could say, okay, the Guardian program may be a good option for charter schools or smaller schools that can't afford an officer, and then it would open that program up to charter schools. Maybe a more economical way to meet the requirements of the law.
Okay, any other questions regarding the capital plan? Okay, the proposed new debt issues, and I think I'm going to go through the TAN first. You've seen this before, so this is this will be pretty fast. Every year we do a tax anticipation note. Basically, it's anticipating taxes. Tax revenues come in November and December. We're paying people year-round, so we need to borrow some money purely for cash flows. General fund, we're focused on salaries in the general fund. And I show this picture, and I update it every year. The blue is the general fund revenues, and the green is the TAN. So when the balance is, what's actually cash, so the cash actually drops negative. There's a few days in November when we make we pay a salary, do a payroll, and tax revenues come in a few days after that. That's when we hit cash, really cash low. So you'll see it's been, fairly steady. It was not as low last year. We're projecting it to drop off again. So the TAN is just there to help make sure we have cash to meet payroll. So this is just a history, and I've done something a little different this year that's on the next slide. This is just giving you the history. I'm going back to 2008 because that was that's pre-recession when we used to keep the TAN outstanding until September. And then during the recession, we cut it off. The rates were so low that there was no way we could have positive arbitrage. So we shrunk the maturity to February, and then we've been doing it till August. Now, I'm toying with the idea of shortening that. So we talked about that last year, and you all delegated that to me to look at. I just wanted you to see the analysis, and this is something we're still playing with, and I don't think I'm going to have a firm decision on the maturity until we get there and see what the rates are at that time. But we've got the investment rates broken out. So if it matures in August, we'll have $2 million of interest revenues. With the borrowing, the cost at 1.8, cost of issuance is the same regardless of the period of time it's outstanding. So the positive arbitrage, $177,000. That's great. If we shorten it to June, we're still positive, but it's about $100,000 less. I'm looking at that because it does make it easier for our accounting department. We don't have the debt issue spanning fiscal years. We've also heard from some investors that would like it to be done within the fiscal year and not rolled in the next fiscal year. So we're also looking at options in the resolution to set up an escrow account that would alleviate that concern. So I think I'm just going to stick with the August maturity, but it will depend on the interest rate environment at the time. I also we ran the numbers and looked at it if it matured 1st of February into January like we did during the recession. And there's a cost to do that. That's not something we'd look at. But we've talked about it, and I hadn't actually run the numbers. And I said, let's just look at it and see what it really looks like. So it adds some data behind the decision. So at this point, I'm recommending that we just go ahead and continue with what we've done with the maturity in August. But I'm hoping that the committee, when they review this and approve it, hopefully you'll give us the flexibility to decide the maturity date depending on the market conditions at the time. Understanding we'll do the same analysis. The finance committee in September is the day of the TAN sale, so I can bring this up and let you know what we're doing before we actually sell it that day. But it looks like it's going to go out to August the way we've done it in the past. So we'll be bringing this to the school board at their meeting in June. I'm not sure if it's the regular meeting or the special meeting. I'm working on the date. The meeting is scheduled, the sale is scheduled for September 24th, and as in the past, we'll invite the students from the finance academies to come and participate in a mock sale while the live sale goes on. That's the TAN. So any questions on that? I mean, we do this every year, but I want to make sure.
It's $115 million this year?
It's the same. We've kept it, the amount has been consistent since 2010. And I don't anticipate changing that anytime soon.
Now, this helps you get through that period
Yeah.
where you're short on funds.
Yeah, and we toy with the amount. I mean, payroll's roughly $60 million every 2 weeks. So if I'm off on cash flows, $115 million covers almost 2 payrolls. It's the month of November. I mean, if we end up, even if we paid $400,000 like we did one year, or these low numbers, in my opinion, it's well worth $400,000 to make sure all our employees are paid timely and we can keep the lights running. So it's just something that simple. I think that we'll have positive arbitrage, and that's gravy. That's not why we borrow. I love making some money on it, but again, we have to be, there's actually a process we go through with tax counsel to make sure we can prove the need. We're not allowed to borrow like this just for an arbitrage play.
Effectively, if you look over the time here, I don't see the average, but on average, it doesn't cost you any money to do this.
Right.
Right?
No, it really
So
doesn't.
you cover your costs, and it doesn't cost you anything other than, even the fees are covered really by the interest
Right.
return.
That's the goal, is to at least have break even,
Yeah.
to get it to where it doesn't cost anything.
Well, it seems like it's a safe harbor, basically, to cover
Mm-hmm.
your spending, and you know those deficits are going to occur.
They will absolutely happen every year. The general fund is very predictable. The only really variable there is when we give teacher raises. And that's something I always mention to Mr. Burke every year. If we decide to move up and pay teachers earlier and we're paying them in, do give a raise at the beginning of the school year, which I think the earliest they could do it is in September or October, because you have to have the number of teachers that are highly effective versus effective. Those all have to be in before they can do the raises. But still, if we paid out, did the raises starting in October, that would happen right in the middle of that cash flow shortfall. So it's something I pay attention to, and I'm always bringing that up to make sure we know what those are.
Will this also encompass, cover all of the staff that you're hiring, you're adding, security and so forth?
Yes. Yeah, it would impact all of that. Absolutely. We're adding more. And we played with the number, assuming for cash flow purposes, Ron Horan in my office has gone through and we said if you have an extra increase, if there's $100 million extra for teacher salaries, another $50 million for security, assume we have an extra $150 million of payroll costs that gets spent in over the years. What does it look like? And it doesn't, it's still a number. Certainly it still impacts it, but we're still within the range of borrowing the $115 million. But we're going to continue to monitor that. Right now, all those positions are not going to be available on day one. It will take time to hire all those officers,
Right.
to hire all those mental health officials. So we'll continue to monitor that. We may see that when we do this next year, we need to borrow a little more. We don't need it for this year, but I had Ron plug those numbers in. Let's see what it looks like, because I don't want to run short. Again, payroll is the one thing in my office. Number one rule is make sure payroll is funded. So.
Absolutely. There'll be a couple empty chairs at the next meeting when Leanne
That's
and I will
right.
be gone.
Yeah, that's the number one rule. Payroll always wins. So we want it. That's what this is for. Okay. Any questions? And I would like to have a vote on this since we go into the board.
Yes, okay.
So
This
moved.
is the moving of the TAN issue. Mike, is there a second?
Excuse me, I'll move approval.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Now, the next financing is one we've been talking about for ages, and this is the sales tax financing. And I'm going to let Laura talk some, and I promise to chime in regularly on this one.
Yes, good morning. So this is exciting. This is a sales tax financing. So as Leanne had kind of mentioned before, cash flows are steadily flowing in higher than the projections. And the district is anticipating doing pay-as-you-go. However, because of state statute, when the district approves a project to commence, which typically takes over 2 to 3 years for the project to be completed, all of those funds have to be identified and in the current budget. So what we looked at, even though the district is still planning on using pay-as-you-go sales tax revenues as they come in, we wanted to see what we could do to bridge that gap that's not there, but for state statutes is there. So we went out and we solicited a proposal on behalf of the district to banks, to the underwriting team, and to the private banks to look to do commercial paper options, bank revolving line of credit, and other short-term financing options that the banks could come up with that could potentially bridge this gap for the district. Keep in mind that depending on how cash flows actually come in, the financing may never be used. And so that was something that we looked at as well when we were doing our analysis on this for the district for the impact.
Right. And I'll just add in, the cash flow projections that we've done right now are based on budget. So when we budget, as Laura said, if for work that's being done, and I'll use an example, we're getting started on work at Palm Beach Lakes High School. We know that work will take 3 years because the work is only happening over summer, spring break, winter break. We can't impact the learning at the school. So we'll take the budget of how much they plan to spend. They're going to award a contract, and the budget is there to be spent over 3 years. But according to state law, I have to have cash or access to cash to cover the full amount before contracts can be issued. So when I look at it, I don't show that we draw cash. In fact, the cash balance at the lowest point is about $23 million. But having said that, sales tax revenues could slow down. There could certainly be a slowdown in the economy over the next 6 or 7 years. They could start, the spending could pick up and go faster than what we have in the budget right now. So I need to have a facility in place just to keep things going for budgetary purposes, and having a facility in place in case those projections are wrong. There's a lot of variables in there in a long period of time. We'd have the facility in place to be able to draw cash if we do need it.
In other words, you need a source of payment for your contract.
Right.
An authorized source.
Right.
Which otherwise doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So we had issued the RFP on March 6th, asking for a not to exceed amount of $100 million based on the cash flow projections that Leanne had mentioned, with the ability to increase up to $250 million down the line if potentially was needed. Those were kind of the options. The letter of credit goes in hand with the commercial paper program, just a revolving line of credit, and then other products. So we received 9 proposals from, 9 banking institutions responded with several different options. And so as you can see below, we have outlined the banks that responded, the terms, the maximum that they were willing to go out for, and then the products that they offered. We shaded in gray. Bank of America was the most attractive for the commercial paper option. And the revolving line of credit, both Bank of America and PNC, were both very attractive, that we wanted to look into further into these options to see kind of how it would shake out. So we did comparisons of the options. We looked at it. There was the variables that we had assumed. We took what they had bid as their rates. We looked at variables as LIBOR, what would happen if it increased or decreased. The authorized amount, as we had said, we had asked for $100 million up to $250, played with that number as well as a draw schedule. So for this presentation, what we're showing you is the current market LIBOR rate, the authorized amount, assuming $175 million, and then the draw schedules, as Leanne was saying, we would potentially need based on projects that are approved right now over the next 3 years, and that's a total, so it'd be $155 million total in year 3. Okay. So the first option for the commercial paper with Bank of America, their letter of credit fee was 30 basis points, and their remarketing fee was 4.5 basis points going out. With a commercial paper, we were assuming there's an annual draw fee of $2,000, and then there would be, if we were to use a commercial paper entering into the market, additional cost of issuance every time you'd have to go and issue another offering statement to notice the market. So that's in there as well. And their rate, we're assuming for the commercial paper that it is trading off of 80% of LIBOR in the market right now. After tax reform, it had bumped up to 80%. So, and we have a summary of this, so I won't go into total interest and rates on this. So the next slide is discussing the revolving line of credit for Bank of America and PNC. So Bank of America had proposed 80% of LIBOR plus 42 basis points if you're to actually draw. If they don't draw, there was an unused fee of 18 basis points. However, they had stated that if the draw on the line of credit for the authorized amount, so what we would currently start off with, not $250 million, would be removed if they had drawn over 50% of that amount. So if there was $80 million authorized originally, as soon as the district drew $40 million, the unused fee would be waived on the remaining $40 million. So that's what's reflected up there. There's no additional fees for annual draws or cost of issuance, so that is also reflected. So then PNC, what they had proposed was 79% of LIBOR plus 41 basis points with a 10 basis point unused fee. So they had stated in their proposal throughout that fee wasn't initially going to be waived. We'll talk to you about that in a second. And if, again, no additional fees for annual draws or cost of issuance, incremental fees going into that. So on the following slide, this is kind of showing you overall the total interest cost based on the assumptions that we had presented to you, as well as the average all-in rate. Like I had said, we ran multiple scenarios going through what would happen with LIBOR, what would happen with the authorized amount, as well as what we estimated for the draw fees. And in almost every situation, the line of credit from PNC was the most attractive offer. So this, what we're showing up here in the top box, is just based off of those assumptions of the draw rate up to $155 million with 175 original authorized amount. And it just shows you if we had done commercial paper line of credit, the cost over what PNC would be. So with the assumption we made, it would show that there was a little bit over $9 million of interest and fees that would be paid if we did the revolving line of credit with PNC at those assumptions. Something we want to talk to you about, though, is, as Leanne had said, this is being put into place to help with the state statute to cover those costs. So there is a very real potential that we don't draw on this at all. So this bottom box shows you that situation if there was $175 million authorized and the district never draws on it over 3 years, what that expense would be. So instead of the $9.1 million, we would be down to a little over $500,000 for PNC. And again, it's the most attractive offer. Something I wanted to mention, though, that I had said before, the district has started to do negotiations with PNC to move forward since they were the low-cost provider from all the scenarios that we ran. And it was requested if PNC could do something similar to what Bank of America did for their unused fee. So as I had said, Bank of America had bid 18 basis points on unused fee and waived it if you drew over 50%. PNC is 10 basis points on the unused fee, and they've agreed that within the first 6 months, if the district draws 60% of the authorized amount, they will waive the unused fee on the remaining undrawn amount of 10 basis points.
Isn't that unlikely?
Yes, I think so.
I mean,
But there could be, if there's a significant change in the cash flows, that could happen, but I don't see it right now. One of the things I liked about this one, as I pointed out with the sales tax report, we already have $3.9 million of interest earned that's been set aside specifically to cover the cost of any short-term financing. So if we're not borrowing, or if we're not drawing down this line of credit, then the fee associated with it is covered with interest we've already earned. So I think that's the best case scenario we have, and that's
In
what.
other words, this $525,000 isn't costing you.
Right, it's going to be covered by interest earnings we've already got. So we'd certainly be paying to
Costs you,
PNC.
but allows you to enter contracts.
Right.
Basically, and
Right.
the cost is $500,000.
Right. So we could end up drawing. I don't want to tell people we will never draw on this, but based on the projections I have right now, and this is something that we'll be reviewing. I've built this, for those of you that sit on the ISOC committee, that report I showed you in the investment report that shows the revenues that have come in and expenditures. The cash flow projection is built into that same document. So every month as I'm updating it, we're automatically updating the projections. So I'll be able to monitor this regularly, and I'm working on how we're going to show that to ISOC, because I do want to share that. When I shared it with the facilities team, their thought was, I've overstated the expenditures and I've understated revenues. We're being very conservative with it. I assume the revenues are going to stay as projected. We're coming in at 114% of projections. So if that continues, that would even make it a stronger case for not drawing on this. But on the other hand, if projects start going faster, if we get more firms in the marketplace that are anxious to get work done, and we can get it done more efficiently, we're certainly, that's the goal. We want to get the work done.
Or if the sales tax goes down.
Or if the sales tax goes down. There's lots of reasons why those projections could be flawed. It's based on the best information we have. I'm very comfortable with them based on the assumptions. But having the line of credit there to draw on in case we really do need it is key. We don't want to slow down projects. We want that work done as quickly as we can. Some of it's security projects, it's school buses, technology, and all the deferred maintenance. So I want to be able to tell facilities, go as fast as you can, and we'll keep up with you. And that's what this is going to help us do.
And something we're also starting off with, I know we had been talking about 175 million. We're starting off with 80 million as the authorized amount. And every year we'll, in the springtime, look at it and see what the district's needs are estimated for the upcoming year to see if there is a need to increase above the 80 million. So while the $500,000 is up there, that's on a lot higher than what we're starting with
Need
right now.
a motion for that, Leanne?
I do.
All right,
Yes.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any further discussion before we vote? So is this 525,000 based on what number?
175 million authorized amount
75.
for all
And if
3
you had
years.
80 million, what does that mean? Does that mean that this number is going to be smaller?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I went through and looked at it based on the actual amount I expected to draw. We have the ability to extend this. We would have to renegotiate terms, but I played with it and just said, let's leave these numbers in. Assume it stayed constant for the 6 years, which is the term I think we're going to need a line of credit. And over the 6-year window, based on actual amounts, it was about 900,000. In 3 years, chances are, I'm not sure, it would be 10 basis points. I mean, who knows where the market's going to be in 3 years when this gets renegotiated. At that time, we'd certainly go to PNC and see if they want to extend it. That's in the documents, that we could work to extend it and renegotiate it. And I'm kind of looking over at Jerry Stanforth when I'm saying this, but it's something we'll look at because we will need it for a total of 6 years.
3-year.
It's a 3-year transaction with the ability to extend it. And at that time, we'll look at it well in advance.
I see. That's the 3-year price. Right?
This is a 3-year price.
Okay.
And if it stays at 80 million, I just looked really quick with no draws, it would be 240,000 for 3 years.
Right. Okay. Any further discussion?
Just want to say this is a good analysis and a good presentation, so thank you.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, and this is very much still a work in progress, but I need to come back to you. We have 2 contracts that are going to be expiring, investment advisor and financial advisor. So these are both contracts with PFM. So investment advisor, that contract, we've been piggybacking off a contract, which means we're using another governmental agency's contract. It was the Greater Orlando Airport Authority. We've been using that for the last few years. That contract's going to be expiring. We're trying to do a direct negotiation with PFM rather than putting it out for bid. We're very comfortable with the work, and they're willing to reduce the costs additionally below what we have right now. So working with them on the investment advisor contract, they're adding in things that we've been doing with them with little side contracts. So they've added in the arbitrage rebate calculations, the current rate. They've actually put in writing things like the assistance with the banking RFPs that they do for us at no charge. They've got that in the contract language. They've also willing to reduce the pricing for the short-term investments, which is the biggest portion of our investment pool, from 5 basis points to 4 basis points. So last year, that would have been a savings of $23,000. So I wanted to bring that to the committee. We're still working through it with General Counsel's office and their contract, their attorneys, compliance area. So it's not completely done, but we're trying to get this into the board, probably in June. So I wanted to make sure we brought this to the committee, make sure you're comfortable with the direction we're going in.
So this is you'd like us to approve?
A new contract with PFM.
A new contract for 5 years.
Right, on the investment
on the
advisory service.
Slightly better.
With a slightly better
Right.
rate. I mean, that's actually a 20% reduction, going from 5 basis points to 4 basis points on the
Okay,
short-term
and that
pool.
would be, I think we would vote on and approve that subject to legal
Yes.
or purchasing.
Right,
So
yes.
moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Any discussion, Paul?
Yeah, well, then the board would have to
Yes,
approve it.
you're actually approving a recommendation to go to the
Right.
board. The board will be the ones that absolutely, they approve contracts.
Okay. Yeah, we use direct negotiations sometimes when it's a situation like this, so.
Anytime it's a professional service, and this is something I work very closely with Blair on, if it's a professional service, we do not have to do an RFP for it. In this case, the contract's coming up very soon. Our purchasing department is incredibly busy. If we can negotiate based on the current contract and a better return, it's a win-win across all the levels of the district as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, and we're working on the same thing with the financial advisor, and we're further along with the investment advisor than we are with the financial advisor. We actually went back to see if we could possibly, if the currently we're piggybacking off a contract with Marion County Schools, and they had the authority to extend that, and I double-checked with them. They had a contract for 3 years with the option to renew for 2, which they have already done. Very happy. We're very happy with PFM. This is on the debt side. They had a clause that said they could extend it for urgent needs. They're in the process of doing an RFP. It will not be done before our contract lapses, which is in June. So we need to have a contract with PFM for financial advisor before we do the TAN. It would come into play for the TAN. So we're doing a direct negotiation with them as well. And they've indicated they're willing to reduce the strategic management fee from $24,000 a year to $18,000 a year, which is a pretty significant reduction. And they're also, and I don't know how much I can say, they have a new function that's coming to market that has not been made public yet, but I've seen a beta of it. It's very exciting, and they're willing to give us some discounts on that. I don't think that's public yet, is it? So I really can't say a lot more on that. I apologize. When it becomes available, I promise to bring that into you, but there's some new things coming that I keep bugging them about, and I've been able to talk to them about how to structure it and what we would want to see. So they're willing to let us have that at a discount. So I'm hoping that you all be willing to let us do a direct negotiation with PFM for financial advisory services. There'll be a slight decrease in the cost of services. We're still working through General Counsel. We're just running to a short period of time to get that done. So it would be
How long
subject
is
to.
this
We would do a
extension?
5-year, this would be a new contract. We're going to do just a new contract with them. We'll do a direct negotiation with them that would have some savings beyond what we had with the last contract.
So you'd like us to authorize, or at
Yes.
least approve the notion
Of a direct negotiation contract with
negotiation.
PFM for financial advisory
Financial advice.
services. This is the debt side.
right? Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Second.
Second? Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. And I think that concludes all the items on the agenda. I'll remind you the next meeting is scheduled for August 9th. And at that meeting, we're going to be talking about the quarterly investment reports again, the proposed new debt issue, and the proposed equipment leases. If we need, I know we need one for air conditioning. Hopefully, we don't need one for computers. We'll also have that debt availability, that analysis that will need to be done if that law passes, and public hearings and all those things. If we get to a point, we may, I'm waiting to see what happens with the legislative session, and we'll work on the timing of the debt issues. If we need to have that approved by you prior to starting public hearings, which we would, I may call and ask if we could do an earlier meeting just to deal with that.
Wondering whether this group can substitute as the public hearing.
No. not, my understanding is it would be a regular public hearing, and my initial thought, and I haven't even mentioned this to Mr. Burke yet, but to see if we could do those in conjunction with the public hearing that we do for the budget for tentative adoption and final, and that way we could do all the public hearings at one time. We have to work with the board office and general counsel's office. There's a lot of questions to work out, and I didn't want to get into the weeds on that until we know if it becomes a law. So if it does, then that public hearing for the budget happens in late July. So instead of having an August 9th meeting, I may want to move that up to middle of July. I should know that in the next week or so. The legislative session's almost over. So if we need to move that up, I may reach out to you to try to
Are
move
there
that
any
up.
findings that are required after the public hearing, or do you just have to have a public hearing to hear?
No, it's just, you have to have 2 public hearings. You have to run an advertisement in the paper, so we could do that at the same time we're doing the ones
This
for
is like the
budget.
TEFRA notice for private activity bonds in the tax exempt area,
Right,
basically, but this is for governmental purposes.
it is.
So it's a little different. It's
So we would be bringing forward the,
another hurdle to
It
issue
is.
debt, to give public input.
so we'll have to work through what that debt affordability analysis looks like. We'd have to get that done pretty quickly. No one has seen what it looks like yet. So we've got to try to get that done. Everything else
Isn't
would
that a
move
coverage
along.
factor for you? Isn't it just showing that you can pay your debt?
It is.
Don't
And
you
I
always do that?
show that with that chart. It's really putting it in whatever format the state requires. So I'm comfortable that we've already done all the work for that. We don't propose a debt issue in the budget until we know we can afford it.
Good thing.
And we're well below, the state requires 75%, that no more than 75% of the COPS debt issue, no more than 75% of the millage earned for tax capital is used for the debt service. We're about 50%. So we're well below that, but we would have to show that in the state format, and we'd have to hold the 2 public hearings so the public could give comment. It is extra hoops to jump through, but I'll give you a warning, we may need to move this up if we try to do it at the same time we do the budget hearings.
If you can get a change in the state law at least to 1 public hearing, it sounds more sensible.
Yeah, if it's 1 public hearing, then we stay right on track.
Right.
As always, if you're going to move the meeting, for those of us who travel in, as much advance notice as possible.
Right, if we end up changing it, and I should know in the next week or so, I'll probably send out a survey with some date options that you all could give me feedback on, and we pick the date. But I'm hoping to leave it just as it is.
In that mid-August date.
Yeah, it's August 9th is the date we have right now. Because in addition to your schedules and my schedules, it's also getting this room. So it's easy for them to film it and do all the things they do behind the scenes. So hopefully we can leave it as planned, as scheduled.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We really appreciate all your feedback.
Hearing, any other business?
No.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon and a good weekend.
Good to see you.